grateful. We are now ready to introduce our next speaker, which we're also extremely excited has joined us for our symposium, and that is Dr. Angela Pharris with the Science of Hope as a Framework for Action. Dr. Pharris is an assistant professor in the Ann and Henry Zarrow School of Social Work at the University of Oklahoma, director of the Center for Child Welfare Training, and senior research fellow at the Hope Research Center. Her research is focused on the application and implementation of hope-centered and trauma-informed practices that impact human services programs. Angela's current research is in child welfare and human service organizations and the application of the hope-centered and trauma-informed framework. This research informed the development of the Hope-Centered and Trauma-Informed Training Program. Hope is a psychological strength, a buffer to stress, adversity, and burnout, and a hopeful mindset that improves organizational and individual outcomes. Dr. Pharris, we thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Gosh, good morning. What a privilege it is to have been invited to come and share with you today and to be part of this incredible event and to share what we've been learning about hope. And so I want to give you just a little background and then we'll get jumped into what hope is. But I'm a social worker by practice, and I've spent most of my career in child welfare settings and part of it in the court systems. And really what I learned through all of that time is that, what an incredible opportunity to be in spaces where we get to see people really move into strategies, these resiliency strategies, and these hopeful things that even in the midst of an incredible thing that they have to overcome, they're able to do that. And so in the Hope Research Center, we started to kind of think about and ask the questions of what is that thing that some people have that just seems to make them overcome, to move forward, to be able to leave from harmful, dangerous situations. And not only what are those characteristics, but also are they things that we can do to create an environment where those things that people have can be activated so that they can use them in the midst of this stress. And so our research didn't begin with the question of let's study hope. The question became, how do we help people who are in the midst of adversity and trauma and stress be well in that context? And so as we started doing that research, what became really clear and really apparent to us, thank you, excellent. Oh. All right, I'm going to do a little hand tip when I want you to change the slide so the whole world doesn't have to listen to me say, change the slide for 45 minutes. So if you'll help me. So here's the thing, what I've been learning, and thank you again for being so patient with me this morning. What we've done though in social work is what we build are these models of practice where what we start to think about and look at is when somebody comes in and they're looking for some help from us. What we've been trained to do comes from what we call the medical model of practice. And what a medical model of practice does is that if I'm simplifying it, and I'm very much simplifying it, is it says in programs and services that we have to ask this question, what's wrong with you? And then our success in programs and services is then measured by the idea that well-being comes from reducing adversity. Now, listen, if I go to the doctor and I'm having a stomach ache or I'm having, an appendicitis problem and the doctor says, what's wrong with you? And he helps me remove that pain, that is a good thing. So by no means am I critiquing that asking and identifying the things that are wrong and remedying them are inappropriate. They're excellent things to be doing. But what we have to understand is simply reducing what's wrong with somebody. Simply taking somebody who is not safe and getting them safe, which again is a very complicated thing to do, a very stressful thing to do. But what we have to recognize as we deliver programs and services and as we advocate for people, that reducing what's wrong with you doesn't mean the presence of well-being. It means we have a reduction of something that's wrong. So if I'm treating somebody for depression or anxiety and we can reduce some of those symptoms, that's amazing. That is a good thing. But it doesn't mean somebody's experiencing joy. If we're working with a child, maybe a really stressed out child who's experienced a ton of stress and trauma, and that child is acting out in the classroom, and we can get that child to kind of settle in and be peaceful throughout the day, that is an incredible thing when that happens. That is miracle working sometimes when that happens. But let's not call it well-being, because there's no evidence that that child's learning or growing or making friends or feels like they belong. Like, what are the things that actually make us well? Now, in my career and in yours as well, and in the time we've been doing this work, there's been some really incredible research around the adverse childhood experiences. And what it has done is it has advanced our way of thinking that what's wrong with you maybe isn't the right question, but it's got to be what's happening to you, or what has happened to you needs to be accounted for in the way we kind of interact and understand and deliver services for individuals. Now, this is a training on hope, so we're not going to talk about the adverse childhood experiences, but I'm going to pause for just a minute to say a couple of things about it. Number one, we know that ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, is the effect of cumulative toxic stress. What happens when you have a childhood or your adulthood is riddled with toxic stress is it actually has a lingering effect on your health and well-being well into adulthood. So these long held ideas of like, kids are just resilient, kids can overcome things, don't worry about it, is science is saying, no, kids really need support to overcome the hard, difficult things in their lives. And that adults, we need support to overcome and move through some of the difficult things in our lives. So for us, I started the story by saying we were trying to figure out, like, what's the thing? What are the things, the characteristics that people have, that some people live and grow up in an array of these events, these adversities, and seem to thrive or do well, and yet others really struggle. So for us at the Hope Research Center, 100% of our research is around hope in the context of trauma. Hope is studied around the globe. We aren't the only people who study it, but other people study it, for schools and classrooms and in healthcare, which are really important studies. But for us, we were looking for what are the strategies that help people who are experiencing violence and neglect and emotional neglect and household dysfunction. Feel forward for me. Now, here's why. Really quickly, adversity is, the Centers for Disease Control say that about 36% of people who have and experience adversity, or about 36% of people have never experienced any of those kinds of adversities. And what I have to say is that's amazing. Good for them. I have tried very hard to have a household myself where my children experience none of those things. But if you really look at the data from the Centers of Disease Control, what is a far more accurate representation of that data is at least 2/3 of the United States have had one or more of these adversities. So first of all, trauma and adversity and toxic stress isn't something that's happening to those clients, these certain children, these certain identified people. Trauma and adversity and stress is me, and it's you. And it is happening in abundance around our communities. And therefore, we need strategies and ways that a system can move through in the entire system in a way that works to relieve some of those stressors, from our political systems to our classrooms, to our programs and services, and even into our employers. The critical point that we know, though, in adversity, so most people have had one or more of those 10 adversities, but the critical cutoff seems to be once you've had 3 or 4 of these, you really start to see these really long-term behavioral changes and physical health problems that emerge. And what the Centers for Disease Control estimate is about 13% of the US population have experienced one or more of these, or 4 or more of these adversities. All right, next slide. Thank you. But when we do step back into the places that we're advocating, into the places that we go for services, into the places where we interact as a result, the courts, things like that, we really do see these adversities start to compound. So the Centers for Disease Control say the average national ACE score is a 1.6. But when we look at things like children in domestic violence shelters, we were able to do a study of about 3,000 children throughout various shelters in the United States. by age 10, they're reporting that they had 4 or more of these adversities on average. Among youth who were in Florida detention centers, so young children, 14 to 20 years old, they reported experiencing 4.2 of these adversities. And then in a study of foster youth, particularly 14 to 18-year-olds in foster care, we could see that the adversities jump up to 5.68. So we need to have strategies in which we can think about, how do we help adversity? How do we help people who are experiencing trauma and stress, not just with the practical, tangible things they need, because we need to do that, but how do we also help them in a way that kind of decreases the stress response that they're having? Now, I'm going to pause here and say, we study ACEs, but we don't really have a huge interest in what your ACE score is. How we actually operate is that most people in the spaces that we are have high ACEs. Assume that trauma has happened, right? Just assume it's there. We don't need to know the number. But what we need to be curious about, and what the question is that I want to challenge you to think through today, is, how does trauma show up? Like, how does it affect our day-to-day functionings? Well, the primary thing we know is that people who experience a lot of adversity actually have a very hard time trusting other people. This makes so much sense. If everywhere you've gone in your life, adults have betrayed you, adults have not kept you safe, people may not be trustworthy to confront or counsel you. I mean, this makes a lot of sense, right? We see in trauma, people who've experienced a lot of trauma, there's an expectation that danger or harm is coming again, that they could be betrayed. And as a result, they become defensive and even maybe aggressive to other people. And that there's an emotional and physical reaction when they're confronted, or when they're receiving help, or even when they're engaging sometimes in what may seem like really simple everyday interactions. There's certainly an incredible amount of shame and a sense and a fear that there's a loss of control. Now, here's what I want to say about trauma behaviors. These are the beautiful way that our brains keep us safe when we're in threat and harm is around, right? I don't ever want to look at somebody and the way the trauma results in these kinds of behaviors and define that in any sort of dysfunctional way. The inability to trust others is what keeps a 5-year-old safe from a sexual predator. The inability and the expectation of danger of harm keeps a victim of violence on alert and looking for triggers and warnings so they can protect their children. So these aren't dysfunctional behaviors. However, there's a time and a place where these behaviors don't serve us well, right? There's a place where, when we need help and we're help seeking, the inability to trust somebody else can be really problematic. Or when we're trying to navigate through something like a court system, being guarded and anxious and physically and emotionally reactive often have a consequence in a system that expects you to behave in a certain degree of decorum. So what we want to do is see in our research is, can hope, because that's what we study, and increasing hope and increasing hopeful processes actually reduce some of these kinds of symptoms that people show. Go forward for me. So we've been working on a model of hope-centered and trauma-informed practice in our work. So let me ask you this. When you hear the word hope, what do you think of? And you can drop this in the chat, but what are the words when you hear the word hope? And also, when you hear the word hope, do you think about that as an emotion? Do you feel hopeful feelings? Or do you think maybe you have hopeful thoughts? Which do you feel like it is? Go ahead and feel free to drop that in the chat, in the comments for me. What does hope mean to you? And is it a feeling you have, an emotion, or is it a cognitive process? Is hope a mindset? So for us in the Hope Research Center, thank you. Yeah, it means not giving up. It means that there's a future that's around there. Thank you. Yeah, future. There's a future ahead. There's something coming for me. That how things are right now may not be. Yeah, there's the possibility of change, and that change is possible. It has a don't give up component to it, right? Things will be better. It's a feeling and a thought. Excellent, excellent. So we define hope in many of the same ways that you do. So hope is a belief that the future will be better than today. And this is where the important part of hope comes in. And you have the power, the ability, the capability, however word we want to put in there, to make that future possible. You have ways to make that future possible. So a couple of things that are really distinct about the way we define hope. For us and for researchers who study hope, hope is a belief. It is a mindset. So we think cognitive thoughts. Hope is a cognitive process. So I'm going to show you how that works here in just a second. But here's why this is powerful is if hope is a feeling or an emotion, that at best, what I can do is I can teach you how to manage that emotion, right? We do anger management, we do mood stabilizers, right? We learn how to manage emotions. But because it is a cognitive process, it's a way of thinking. They're the thoughts I have inside my head about myself and my future and whether I can make that future possible. So they're thoughts. It also means I can be taught to do that. It means that in programs and services, we can model it. It means that we can let people borrow our hope until they're ready to have it for themselves. And when people have none, we can teach them how to do this. And so because of that, it becomes this powerful, powerful component of being well that we may not always have access to in kind of the array of services. So we've started to get really excited about this and say, well, if it's a cognitive process, and research actually shows it's one of the best predictors of our well-being, my ability to believe that my future will be better and that I have the power to make that future possible is one of the best predictors of my well-being, then it means we can start to put this intentionally into the way we talk to one another. It means we can teach it to kids and adults. It means we can walk through our facilities and our systems and our programs and services and think, where am I nurturing hope and where might I be robbing people of it when I don't mean to be? And so we see hope as a framework now, a lens in which you should be thinking about your work is where do I have an opportunity to nurture hope today? Now, the other thing about this is it's distinct and different from optimism. A belief that my future will be better is optimistic, and optimism is quite good for us as humans. There's a good amount of research, but there's also a good amount of just evidence and knowledge and our own experiences that show that sometimes I'm really optimistic about something that I actually have no way or plan or strategy to get to. I think about when my daughter was in elementary school and she was taking spelling tests every week. My daughter didn't love spelling. She didn't love doing and practicing and the work it took to learn to spell. But every week, about midweek, I would say, how are you going to do on that test this week? And she was, I'm going to do great, Mom, with all of the optimism of an elementary age child who believes they will just do well on a test that they've done nothing to prepare for. So we can have false optimism sometimes. We can desire something very much, but not have pathways. And so optimism can be rooted in the desire for something. What's different about hope is this second part is that, and I have ways to make that future possible. Feel forward for me. So the good news is hope has three core things. So if it's a cognitive process, then how would you teach it to somebody? How do you do this for yourself even? How do you start to nurture your own hopeful thinking? Well, the first thing we need to do is we have to be able to set goals. Goals are, I'm using that as a kind of a general term. What I'm talking about is what are the things I want in my future? What's something I want today? What's something I want this week? Think about a family or an adult who's coming into your programs and services, activating their belief that the future can be better and that they can make that future so. What do they need? What do they want for themselves? Not what do you want them to want, but what do they want for themselves? So helping people be able to identify goals that are possible, goals that are probable, goals that they could do is the cornerstone of this. But after somebody identifies something they want, what do I want? I want my family to be safe. I want my child to be safe. I want to be financially able to take care of myself so I can leave somebody who's not safe for me. I want to be able to access my own health care by myself. Like, what are the things that people want in the service delivery system? And then how do we build pathways to help you get there? So hope is my ability to set goals, identify pathways or strategies, and routes towards those goals. And that this is what's really critical is that when people are using hopeful thinking, not only can they identify a route, they identify multiple routes. That there's pathway one, and if pathway one gets blocked, hopeful thinkers can identify a pathway two and pathway three and pathway four. They can understand the obstacles are something that can be overcome. And then finally, the third component of hope is that we have to be able to have agentic thinking, is the academic term, but what we're talking about here is willpower. My mental energy is actually the word I like the most now. The ability to sustain the motivation to move along those pathways. So when we want to do hope, if you forward for me, when we want to do hope, we have to do all three of these. Now, here's the problem with my research is we use hope all the time in our day-to-day language. We name buildings the Hope Center for something, something. I live in Oklahoma. You guys are, a lot of you, I think, are in Texas, right? Where it's hot as can be for most of the summer. So we say things like, I hope it doesn't get above 100 degrees today. We had storms last night, so we say things like, oh, hope we don't get a tornado tonight. Like, so we use hope in our language all the time. Now, let me tell you about it when I say it that way. I really have a goal for there not to be a tornado. They're dangerous, they're scary, they're horrible things to consistently live through. And so I have a ton of mental energy. I have a lot of willpower towards that goal, but I don't have any pathways towards that, right? I really can't fix that. When I say things like, well, I hope you're well, I don't know that I always have a way. I'm wishing those things for you. So I want you to step back for a second and think about that most of the time when we're using the word hope in language, we're saying it in a way that we should be saying, I wish for there not to be storms today. I wish you well. I wish you a happy birthday. Hope is not about wishing. Hope is not about the power of positive thinking. Hope is not, well, if I just believe it, I can be it. That is not what we're talking about. Hope is the thing that we're actually activating in some of our darkest, most challenging moments and days of our lives. Let's take, for example, somebody who's walking into any part of domestic violence service array. When they are walking in the door, they have activated their hope. They are pulling your door open literally with the belief that the future can be better than where they're at right now, and that your programs and services are pathways to help them get there. What we want to do with Hope Science is to nurture and encourage you to sustain that activation of their hope. And so in doing so, we want to be sure that we're thinking about how do we help somebody identify goals they value, not program goals, goals they value, and how our pathways, our strategies to help, our programs and services are pathways to those strategies. And that all along the way, we can help nurture their mental energy. If you'll forward for me. But here's the thing. We study this in the context of ACE and trauma. So what we know is that goals, pathways, and willpower are critical. Anytime I'm missing any one piece of that, all I have is a wish. I wish to be sober. I wish to be safe. I wish to do well on a test this week. I wish my husband would clean out the garage, right? We say hope in all of these kinds of ways that we actually have no control over. So for us, we've been studying, well, how does trauma then really erode at hope? And I got to confess, when we first started doing this, we wondered if to some degree it was almost impossible to be hopeful in the midst of really, really complex trauma. But the good news is it is not. And actually, now it seems like a silly idea that we even thought that. But we know that people who experience trauma and adversity use their hopeful thinking in order to move themselves ahead. However, there tends to be some patterns around people who have a lot of trauma, or when we're experiencing traumatic stress, of how it impacts us. So let's look at that goal setting process together. Oh, stay there. Go back down. Sorry. Let's look at the goals. Thank you. Let's look at the goal setting process together. The first thing we know is that when somebody's experiencing trauma and adversity, they are far more likely to set avoidant goals, goals that help them avoid something from happening, rather than achievement goals, goals that help them to move towards something. So what we start to see are things like goals of things like, I just want to keep my kids safe. I just want to not fail the test. I used to work in a discharge program in prisons and jails, and people would say, I just want to never come back to jail again, right? Those are good goals. Not returning to jail after being in jail or prison for a season is a really good goal. Keeping your kids safe as a primary goal of your parenting is vital, right? So avoidant goals serve a purpose. But what we need to do as helpers if you're in a position where you're helping somebody navigate their goals, is we need to recognize what's the root of an avoidant goal, and it's worry and fear. And so what we need to recognize is that when somebody is talking to us about what do they want, what they're telling us is, I have a fear of my future. And so I'm going to set some goals that I'm confident I can win, or that limit the amount of harm that will come my way. Versus when people aren't experiencing stress, when people can keep their stress in control, or some of the primary stressors have faded from their lives, right? They're now safe. Then they can start to move towards achievement goals. The other thing we know is that when we're experiencing trauma and adversity, what we can only do most of the time is very short-term goal planning. I've spent most of my career helping youth in foster care. And the number of times they've been involved in a school program in 6th, 7th grade where they start to have them take career tests and talk to kids about college or the military or vocational training programs. And man, that kid's just trying to get through today, right? So what we know is when people are experiencing trauma and adversity, they need short-term goal setting. How do you help me manage through this week? How do you help me manage through the next week? How do I think about just what are my goals for just this month? And what happens for people, and I think often people who are moving through services and programs in domestic violence, is they start to worry about those long-term achievement kinds of goals they're going to need to pursue in order to stay safe long-term. And it starts to feel like that's a future they can't control. And so when we step back as helpers and we start to help people navigate even their avoidant mindset goals that are rooted in fear and worry, but with short-term strategies, we can start to see them shift. Now, the second thing we know is trauma and stress really eroded our pathways thinking. Pathways thinking becomes incredibly difficult for any of us when we're under stress. But when you've had a lifetime of cumulative stress, or you've been suffering for months, if not years, in your life, the ability to problem solve becomes really limited. Now, you in domestic violence, you are kind of experts in this in ways that other parts of human services don't do, frankly, is breaking things down and the tasks to get to the goal into micro steps. What's the first thing you need to do? What's the next thing you need to do? What's the third thing that you could do today to even prepare to make a safety plan, right? So you're experts in this. But I also want to make sure that we're talking about and helping people understand that there are multiple ways that they could get to their goals. Not just one, multiple ways that we can get to a goal. Let's think about something like substance abuse recovery. There are multiple ways that you can move towards the goal of recovery, right? Not just one. You don't have to go into one intensive program that then goes into an outpatient treatment and then moves into mentorship through AA and NA. There's multiple ways you can get there. What we need to do when we're in a helping relationship with somebody who's in the midst of trauma and adversity is make sure that we're not just offering them the way, one pathway to get to safety. Let's go back and make sure that we're offering and showing them that there are multiple ways and allowing them to pick the strategies that they feel the most comfortable with right now. And then the third component of trauma and adversity is willpower. And this is one that we get so wrong in US culture. Oh my goodness, we have adopted kind of this cultural norm of these ideas like where there's a will, there's a way. And if you just want it, you'll go get it. And that couldn't be furthest from the truth for most of us, for all of us, really. It's not the idea that I have goals that I want and that I really care a lot about, and I may have strategies to get there, but frankly, I don't have the mental energy to pursue them today. And so therefore, what we need to also make sure is as we nurture somebody and we're nurturing their hopeful thinking, we're helping them get kind of right about the willpower thing, because all of society is kind of training us up that if we just want something bad enough, we'll go get it. And what we know is trauma and adversity depletes us of our ability to do that. Think about this. We wake up every day and maybe we have this many things that we need to do to get through our day. But I have this much mental energy because of the stress and adversity and the surviving state that I have to stay in. So when you provide programs and services, not only do you want to have a conversation about, well, what's your mental energy towards this, right? And have even a conversation that says, it's not unlimited. Our mental energy is just like our physical energy. If we went out and ran a few laps around this building, we would all stop at some point, right? Physical energy isn't infinite. Our brain energy isn't infinite either. We will all stop at one point with problem solving, strategizing, and sustaining. Also, be thinking about what are some things that you can make sure that people have access to that really restore their mental energy. So, nutrition is important, sleep and rest is important, being able to use some of their coping skills and different things we go in there. But the gift that we've learned in this is really helping people understand that it is not infinite. You need to have strategies to manage that mental energy. Okay. So let's, in a really quick example, let's put it all together. How many of you, I wish I could see you. This is the challenge of the online thing, but I'm going to assume since most of you are in Texas, you have all learned how to drive a stick shift vehicle somewhere in your life, right? Anywhere where there's a lot of farm country, ranch country, trucks, and what have you, we have learned how to drive a stick shift truck. So let's take back and remember the very first time you're in a car and you're learning how to drive and it's a manual transmission. Can you see it? You see that extra pedal down on the floor? Can you see, the smell? For me, it was like a 1970 something farm truck is what I was sitting in. So it had a really long stick shift sitting in the center of it. And the windows were down and it was hot. Well, let's imagine I'm teaching you how to drive a stick shift vehicle for the first time. So you have a valued goal in place, right? I was learning how to drive probably at 13 because I was on a farm and age doesn't matter on farms. But I wanted to learn to drive a truck because I wanted to be able to have freedom, right? So driving the truck really wasn't the goal. The goal was we lived way out of town and I needed to learn how to drive so I could go meet my friends. I could go to football games. I didn't have to drive the yellow bus to school anymore, right? So my valued goal was independence and freedom. And driving that stick shift truck was a pathway for me to get there. So let's start out and see if you can remember with me. You've never done it before, but let's add some adversity to this, right? It's something you really, really want, but let's add some adversity. I parked that thing on a hill. Nice big hill. And behind me sits your grandpa's brand new car, something he's so proud of that he bought. So let's talk about this. So I'm sitting in the stick shift vehicle. I've got the brand new car sitting behind me. I'm on a hill, but I have a goal I really want. So I'm going to try, even though it's stressful and uncertain and the future's uncertain. I desire the goal enough that I'm going to give it a try. But what's going through your head right now? What is the mindset right now? You've not pulled out of the car yet. You're on a hill. What are you thinking? You're thinking things like, don't hit the car. Don't kill the engine. Don't make a mess. Even if what you're thinking is pull forward, if I asked you to finish that thought, it's pull forward so I don't roll back and hit the car, right? That's what I mean by an avoidant goal. Avoidant goals serve a purpose. Not hitting your grandpa's brand new car is a very good goal, right? It is a very good goal. But underlining that goal is fear, worry, and uncertainty. And so we have to be aware as somebody starts on this journey that that's what's happening. So sure enough, though, you really desire the goal, even with all that fear and uncertainty. And so you push that, you got that clutch. And I tell you, okay, now let off the clutch and push the gas and we're going to roll forward. And so you let off the clutch and push the gas. And what happens? It's the very first time. What happens? The car dies, right? And the car doesn't just die. The car dies. It shakes and it shimmies and it clunks and the engine makes a sound you've probably never heard it make before because everybody who's ever driven this car has done this correctly. And you had this fearful mindset anyway of don't mess this up, don't roll backwards, don't make a mistake. And in your first attempt, failure happened. Failure happened. Think about this in the context and the settings of the work. Where do people start to engage in programs and services and failure is possible? And how do we need to do hope in those moments, right? So it's not this big, like, how do we have a whole campaign of hope? How do we do all this? How do we help people when they come in and say, okay, I've got a start of a plan. I'm gonna go talk to the attorney. I'm gonna go apply for housing. I'm gonna try to get this job, but I'm really scared and I'm really uncertain. And my mindset is just don't mess this up. How do we help them do hope in that moment? So let's go back to that stick shift vehicle. You had this avoidant mindset and you made a mistake. The question becomes, why did you try again? And actually, if I ask people to say, did you try it? If you didn't try again, what they would say is because I had another way to get to my goal of being free. I didn't have to learn how to drive that stick shift vehicle. But for most of us that do drive them, the reason why we kept going is because we really valued the goal. This is why it's so important as helpers is that we really understand what somebody's goal is from their perspective. What do they really want? Because when there's an avoidant mindset and some failure happens, we need to help them tap into why they want to keep trying. What is it? So you really wanted that freedom and you had that failure. And now you're pushing the clutch in again with the mindset of don't mess this up again. Don't mess this up again. And so I'm going to give you a little better advice. I'm going to clean up the pathway and clean up the barriers. And I'm going to say something like release the clutch slowly while you push the gas at the same time. And sure enough, you slide that car, you're in first gear, and you roll that car forward. And you're going 2 miles an hour in the parking lot. And it is a Super Bowl moment, right? You're like, because here's what's happened. You went from the mindset of, I can't do this, don't mess this up, don't make the mistake. But as soon as the car started to roll forward at 2 miles an hour, the mindset shifts to maybe the future is possible. Maybe I can do this. I'm doing it. Maybe I can do this. That's where hope is happening. So it's not this gigantic, let's build a big palace full of hopeful people. It's how do we activate hope in those moments? Where are you metaphorically with people who are trying to just get going 2 miles an hour in a parking lot in a brand new six shift vehicle? And how do you nurture their belief that the future can be better in that space? Because here's what happens. I'm going to have you pull over in my stick shift vehicle and I'm going to say, now let's do it again. But what is your thought this time? Your thought this time is, I've done it before, so I can do it again. And that's the mindset of a hopeful person. So we have to rehearse and practice this. Now, sure enough, simply pulling it out and I start to do it again. And then I begin to believe that maybe I could drive it up and down the road. I don't just have to do it in the parking lot. And once I drive it up and down the road and I have a little success doing that, I begin to see I could drive it on the interstate. And once I begin to drive it up and down the interstate, I actually don't have to devote any mental energy to this goal anymore at all. I've got it. It's mine. But in the beginning, how much mental energy do you have to devote? 100% of it. I'm a parent. I had a child. I have a 20-year-old, but when she was 15 and learning how to drive, how much mental energy did I want her to devote to driving? 100% of it. So think about, that's a metaphor, but let's think about where in your programs and services are you interacting with people who are just trying to get the car going 2 miles an hour in the parking lot, and how much mental energy do they need to go there, and how do we help them manage that stress? If you'll slide for me, we're going to jump ahead a couple, right? Oh, we're going to stop right here. This is the last thing I want to talk to you about. Hope is the largest predictor of well-being that we can see in the research. But sometimes people have a hard time with that, and I understand that. I actually call it the craft store problem. It's that hope is out on like t-shirts and signs in the craft store, and you can hang it in your cute little home. And I love that because I believe in the science of hope. But sometimes it feels like something that is so serious that gets kind of anyway. So sometimes what people need is they need to think about it a little bit from that medical model. What is hopelessness, right? If you're having a hard time believing that hope could be such a strong predictor of my well-being, then let's talk about what's hopelessness. So in the chat, what I want you to drop for me is what words come to mind when you think about the opposite of hope? What is hopelessness? What's another word to describe being hopeless? I'm going to pause for a minute because I want to let the chats come in before I get ahead. What are words that come to mind in the opposite of hope? Thank you. Despair, feeling lost, being lost, the feeling of being alone, the sense that I'm alone, the belief that I'm alone, right? That there's no point, that I'm fearful of my future, there's no way out. Yeah. So sometimes I think when we get in this space and I start to talk about hope, if you struggle to believe that the power of hope is this big of a deal, that just my ability to set goals, manage pathways, nurture my willpower, that hope, which is the belief that the future can be better and that I have the power to make it so, is so powerful, then what we have to flip back and say, well, what is the impact of despair and uncertainty and suffering and feeling stuck and feeling lost and in isolation? Those have huge impacts on my well-being, right? So restoring those things, using these strategies is critical. Go forward for me. So what we see is the loss of hope as a process. That for most people, they have a goal that they want, something that they desire, but it starts to get blocked. The pathways start to get blocked. And the initial response we have to that is, I have something I want and it's getting blocked and now I'm getting mad, right? Or whatever kind of substitute feeling or emotion we have. So some people aren't comfortable expressing anger. So they might be anxious or cynical or doubtful or fearful, but this kind of sense of, I want the future, but it keeps getting blocked and I'm ashamed and I'm mad. As a matter of fact, I want you to think about the last time you interacted with somebody who was angry. They were venting, they were mad. What were they venting about? From a hope framework, how could you talk about that? Were they telling you about a goal that they had and how others or they felt blocked? Were they telling you about the goal that they had and the mental energy they needed? They just couldn't get it. They just couldn't get there. And they're mad at themselves. They're mad at somebody else for being a barrier. And after some repeated attempts to fix the goal and to get to the goal, and it still doesn't work, then we tend to move into a place of despair. Despair is the most common word we get when we say, what's the opposite of hope? Is being in a state of despair. But I want to point out for a second that even in despair, people still desire the goal, but the pathways seem unavailable. And now there's an urgency. I got to do something right now. Where have you seen despair in your work? Right? We were with a group of child advocates and they said when a non-custodial parent kidnaps their child and runs, that's an act of despair. They still desired the goal, either to have their child or to have power over the other partner. That was a goal. Not all goals are healthy, but they had a goal for power and they did something really desperate. But the actual loss of hope is apathy. The loss of hope comes when I believe that the future's been determined and nothing I can do is going to change that outcome. And so when we are encountering apathy, what I want you to do now is interact with apathy with a completely fresh set of eyes. Next time you're interacting with a kid who comes in and sets his head down and doesn't even look up for the whole day, somebody who comes to a group session and never says a word, somebody who comes before a judge in a courtroom and the judge says, what's something you want? And the parent or the adult shrugs their shoulders. I don't want you to see that as anything other than a person who's experiencing really low hope. They believe that it doesn't matter what they say or how they answer because the future's been determined. And then we want to build in and start to restore relationship. How do we start to do that? How do we help people start to imagine that their future could be possible? How do we let them borrow your hope for them if they really can't see it anymore for themselves? And then when the time is right, we want to set some small goals. We want to nurture some pathways to get to those small goals, short-term goals, not big achievement things when somebody's been apathetic. What's a small thing we can do? Maybe we can help them get some identification. Maybe we can help them get a meal today, a warm meal, a good meal, right? Maybe we can help take care of some fresh socks and underwear for their kiddo, right? What are some things we can do that just start to lean into the idea that the future is possible and our programs and services are a pathway to get there? I'm going to stop here and give some time for questions in the comments section. And thank you to the team who had to be my tech support today. I'm so sorry that that happened, but I'm really grateful that you were able to pull that up and do that. I did see in the chat, I'm not great at reading the chat while I talk, but I did see somebody asked about the slides. And I think that, yes, those were the slides that are going to be available to you. They actually have a little more detail in there as well, some strategies and things that'll help you move along. But what questions do you have for me about the science of hope? How can I help you with this today? Thank you. What questions do you have? If not, I'll ask myself questions. Because I have usually there's two or three things people always ask me. What questions do you have? Yeah. Okay. Noah, thank you. Good question. What are some strategies about working with people who've caused the harm? So, somebody who is the perpetrator of violence, who's, I do a lot of this work in child welfare, right? So, in the child welfare system, inherently, what we have are parents who've caused harm to their kids while they still love their kids, right? Or something's going on and they can't. So it's really the same process, right? But it is about setting goals towards well being, not goals that would allow them power and control. So the distinction we want to make in here is how do we help people set goals towards a future where they can be well? And power and control, nobody's well in that situation. Even the perpetrator, they're not well when they're exhibiting power and control. As a matter of fact, oftentimes I think what people are doing when they're being violent is it's become a desperate pathway to a goal they want. They don't want their partner to leave them. They don't want to lose control. They don't want to lose finances. They don't want to whatever's going on. So what we want to do is a lot of those same strategies. But here's what we want to do in the goal setting process. I really want you to spend some time talking about the goals. Not just what is your goal, but why is that goal important? So talk to them about things like, well, is this a goal that's going to help you to achieve something or to avoid something? Like that question alone could be really powerful. Is this a question that's going to be really hard for you? Is this a goal that's going to be really hard for you to get to? Or is this something that you've got what you need to make it happen? How many times have you tried to get to this goal before? When has it worked? When didn't it work? So not even getting into the how do we get to the goal, the pathways conversation, but spend a good 5, 7, 8 minutes just asking questions about the goal to help the person sort out what do I really want here and how do I get there? And so that's the strategy I know. I'll tell you my own question. With a parent in the okay, can I share an example of a parent in the courtroom who shrugs their shoulders? Yeah, okay. We actually been working in Mississippi with the court judges, some in Oklahoma and in Washington. We're getting ready to start a large project with the family courts to really work through some of these exact strategies. And we've actually worked out in Mississippi, we created a bench card for judges to use that give them a set of questions that they can explore around goals, pathways, and willpower with somebody who is shrugging their shoulders in court. What I think the primary thing we want to see you do is signal that it's okay that somebody doesn't have an answer, that you want them to think about what's important to them, and that everybody in the courtroom needs to be seen as somebody that's for this family, right? Who's for them? Who's on their team? Who's here to help them? And so thinking through like what are some examples of goals? Like are there spaces where different people can help families brainstorm ahead of time? What are some goals you might have? What are some strategies? But in the end, if somebody is still just so scared or so intimidated that they're shrugging their shoulders off and they can't answer you, then let's just work on connection. This is where you just say, you being safe is so important to me. And anything you can do, I want to help you with. You matter. We care, right? So it's connection is a piece of that. And it's an important piece of that. Yeah, what can attorneys do? What can judges do? Whew, this is tricky, right? You have some laws and standards you have to follow in the courtroom for sure. But nurturing the belief in yourself first that the future can be better and that your courtroom is a pathway to those goals that people have is going to be a really critical part in helping you do that work. I'm answering a complicated question in 30 seconds. I want to acknowledge that. We actually do a long training where we come in and work specifically to help you implement this. And we spend weeks, if not hours, working on how do we do this? What would be the way we would interact? and see it work. But we have seen it work really well in the courtroom. We think the courtroom is a place to nurture collective hope. We think everybody in the room has an opportunity to help somebody see that the future can be better, and that what's happening in the courtroom is a pathway to make that future possible. Even if it's hard, even if it feels like punishment, even at times, that how is that helping make the future better? All right. I did see that that I was asked to ask my question. So the number one, I get two questions most of the time. So I don't even put it in the presentation because they come in fairly consistently. But in a virtual world, you may not feel comfortable. One is, aren't you just talking about resiliency? And I think that's a good question. We're not. Resiliency and hope, and actually you can see in the title of the conference, they're titled as two different things: building hope and resilience in communities and families. Resiliency is different than hope. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back from adversity. So there's an energy or an emotion attached to it. And really in research, we see it defined lots of different ways. But here's what we know. Resiliency is really, really good for us. My ability to kind of keep going in the midst of things that are hard, to persist, is really critical to my well-being. But what we found in our research is hope is the mindset that activates resiliency. So let me say it like this. People aren't just resilient. I don't bounce back from every adversity in my life. Some things I'm like, well, I got beat by that. It's done, right? I haven't bounced back from every adversity. I've got a 9 ACE score, by the way. I've experienced almost every kind of violence you can experience in your childhood. But what I do know is that when I think the future can be better and that I can make that future possible. So when I activate hopeful thinking, then I'll do the bouncing back stuff. So hope, when we nurture hope, we're actually nurturing the capacity to be resilient. Not everything has to be bounced back from. So they are distinct concepts. And what we believe is if we nurture resiliency, we'll see hope go. If we nurture hope, we'll see resiliency go up with it. And so that's what we lean into. This is why we do hope alone. We don't talk a lot about resiliency and resiliency strategies. There's a lot of people doing really good work in that space, but people aren't just resilient randomly. They're resilient when they believe the future will be better. And so we have to be constantly nurturing that mindset. The question I also see here is, how do we deal with a person that just always seems very discouraged and very negative? That's tough. Again, you're asking a complex question that I've got 30 seconds to give you an answer to. But because hope is a cognitive process, it also means people didn't have access to those lessons. In the same way, I've got like young people in foster care, we'll meet them as teenagers and realize they can't count coins. And it's because they missed that part of second grade through moving through different custody placements, right? They had to change schools and they just completely missed the lesson. And because you can learn it pretty easily, nobody ever went back and taught it to them. Hope is a cognitive process. So here's what I do when somebody's in a really negative space. I do a little bit of imagining with them. Tell me about a time that you had really hard stuff happen before. Not this stuff, but other hard stuff. What'd you do? How'd you get over it? How'd you handle that? What made you decide to take it on, right? So we're going to imagine. Sometimes I'm even going to help people imagine their future. I'm going to say, well, let's imagine, things are really tough right now. Like I'm always going to acknowledge the negative feelings somebody's having. But I might even say something like, let's imagine yourself 30 days from now and you're safe. What would that look like? How would you know? How would it feel to be safe? We know that imagination's an instrument of hope. My ability to see that my future is possible is part of the ability to set those goals. And when I'm stuck, I can't do it. Now, there's a time to grieve. There's a time to just, hope has to happen at a time when it's right? We're not going to come in with somebody who's just suffered a catastrophic life and do hope work. We're going to let the feelings be there and be present. But when somebody's in a constant state of negative attention, it's a fear of the future is what they're telling you. And so how do you help them build just small little goals for today? Small little goals for today or tomorrow. Small goals for the rest of this week, right? And see if we can't help them shift some of that. I'll also map it out. Like I'll write it down. It won't even be a conversation. I'll be like, well, here's how this happens. Some people, they have to be able to set goals and then they got to identify strategies to get there. So I would map that out for somebody who's feeling particularly negative at a time. Some of that's also cultural, right? Some of it is not community, maybe not a specific culture is negative all the time, but my husband was raised in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee. So it's a place of generational suffering, generational poverty. And so the expectation that the future is going to be bad is really prevalent in that space, right? So they're oriented around just thinking like the future isn't ever going to be better. This is where we are. This is what we do. So we have to teach hopeful thinking. We have to be intentional, but that's the power of hope, is that it's something we can teach. We can teach it to one another. And then I think I see one more question, and then I'll probably need to wrap up so the moderators can step in. Does hope in an individual counseling begin with violence itself or establishing hope apart from the relationship? Gosh, that's a tricky question, Michael. Hope can exist while violence is in that space too. That's the thing that we've learned in our research around victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because we've studied this. What we've seen is that hope is activated by just the process of coming into services, right? So we can see the belief that the future will be better has been activated, and your programs and services are a pathway to that for the individual. So while somebody's experiencing violence, they are also finding survival strategies to get to the next goal. And so they can exist at the same time. But what we did see is we had an opportunity with one of our programs in Tulsa where we could ask actually open-ended questions about what are your goals? What are your goals? And here's what we did see in this process is what the service recipients, what the folks were saying in their goals. Their goals were things like to keep my family safe, to be able to parent, to be able to have joy again, to be able to enjoy a night of watching television. Like those were their goals. Their goals weren't to get an order of protection. Their goals weren't to get legal representation. Those things are pathways to the goals that they have. They wanted to be free to make their own decisions. And so when we're providing programs and services to somebody who's in the midst of violence, what we need to help them see is how those are pathways to the goals that they have of being safe. And an order of protection is not the goal. An order of protection is a pathway. And there's other pathways, right? There's multiple ways we could keep people safe. I really appreciate, one, I assume you were patient with me, but if not, my apologies. But I appreciate your patience as I struggled through a little bit of tech in the beginning. But I just want to lean in that the power of hope is one of the best predictors of well-being. And I thank you. I also think, though, that hope is one of the best descriptions of what you do. And what you do makes a difference. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the invitation from the organizers of this event. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Pharris. That's such an excellent presenter. We're so grateful you were able to join us. And what you did today with your presentation is making a difference in the lives of all of our attendees as well. So thank you very much. Folks, we are a couple minutes early for our 15-minute break. You have until 10:45 a.m. until our next session. So please enjoy, get some caffeine, get something in your bellies, take a little break, stretch, and come back and join us for the rest of the day. We have a lot of more equally excellent content coming up for you. So thank you very much, and we will see you all at 10:45.